Today's success is a proud moment for Iraqi forces fighting against ISIS. That's the word from the Pentagon spokesman, who congratulated Iraqi troops after they took over a strategic government building in the key city of Ramadi. Government forces today raising the country's flag over the building, but defense officials telling Fox News this fight is not over yet. They say at least 100 ISIS fighters are still believed to be holed up in Ramadi. U.S. airstrikes have been supporting Iraqi forces on the ground as they fight to take back the city from ISIS. Militants seized Ramadi, you may recall, back in May, in a major setback for the Iraqi government. Of course, American troops fought two major battles in Ramadi about a decade ago, and analysts say the fight to take back that city from ISIS is seen as a major test for Iraqi forces. Let's bring in Mike Barrett, former intelligence officer for the Office of the Secretary of Defense, former senior analyst for the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Mike, good to see you. There's a difference between controlling a part of a city or all of a city and defeating the enemy, isn't there?
Yeah, that's right. So I think when people look at this historically, the proper analogy is more like Vietnam as opposed to something like World War II, where there's kind of a defined front. And so in a situation like Vietnam, where you had guerrilla warfare, you might have U.S. or Allied or South Vietnamese control during the day, but the real problem was that at night the insurgents would come back in and they would terrorize the local population. And I'm afraid that's the same thing that we're going to see throughout Ramadi. Maybe not in the city center properly, but I could see it in the rest of that area for sure. Well,
and Ramadi, has it not, Mike, has been really ravaged with booby traps especially.
It has, yes. The local Anbar Council, which is sort of the group of sort of governors, if you will, from the local area, estimate that about 80% of the city has been destroyed. We know that whenever ISIS takes over a place like this, they leave hundreds and hundreds of booby traps. One report actually of a school said that every single desk in the school had IEDs attached to it. Right. So they do that obviously to slow down the government forces that are trying to retake control, but it creates a real bloody mess, and it just makes it very, very slow and painful to retake that territory.
Let's look beyond Ramadi. Fallujah, closer to Baghdad, that's still under ISIS control, right?
It is, and Fallujah actually is really just an awful, awful, terrible place to fight. The U.S. Marines valiantly went in there several times, managed to clear it and hold it, but we've since lost it. And so what you see is that, and this is the nature of an insurgency warfare, ISIS can retreat from a given piece of the map, but if they still control the surrounding regions and if they can come back at will, then essentially, while it's a good thing, obviously, to push them back and to kill them on the battlefield, you still have to keep it in perspective. They still own Mosul, which is the second largest city in Baghdad, or in Iraq, and they still have a lot of presence throughout much of the region.
So, Mike, this is not going to be a short deal here. I mean, this is going to be a long fight against ISIS?
Yeah, two quick indications of that. One, when I was in the Pentagon, we used to refer to this as a generational conflict. By that, we meant a 20, 30, possibly even 40-year war. So even though we're a decade and a half into it, we have to keep in mind we still got a long ways to go. And I was reading even this morning in the Air Force Times, they were talking about how 2016, they're anticipating a full year of fighting for the U.S. Air Force between Iraq and Syria. They're expecting, this is not going to be over in a month or two. Right. They're already making their deployment plans for a whole year.
Yeah, and we didn't even get to talk about Mosul, which is a huge city, which ISIS has controlled now for a year and a half, and that's going to be a huge battle, so long way to go. Mike Barrett. Mike, thanks for being with us.
Sure thing.